what is possible here and how can I contribute to this and what can I receive? And is there something for me to change, something for me to discover that's outside of anything that I've been taught, you know? And so that just kind of opens this doorway for this interconnected growth where we get to be stewards of the earth as the earth is stewarding us.
It turns out awareness is not a problem, but actually a superpower. And with awareness, you can actually talk to plants. In this interview with Monica Gilliam, we dive into the world of talking to plants, what that means, what that looks like, and if they actually talk to us and how they talk to us, and what the plants have to say to us, say to you about consciousness, about where we're at in the world today, in the state of the world today, and living in divisiveness and how we can come together. Monica received her master's degree in Eastern Asian medicine. She's part of Access Consciousness and a certified facilitator. These days, Monica's main question is, what are the infinite possibilities for each of us? I'm Natalie Forsbauer, founder of Heart and Soil Living and Heart and Soil Magazine, where we envision a new normal where you're healthy. The planet is thriving and food is power-packed with nutrients and flavor. We help you farm and garden better. You can join our newsletter for free at heartandsoilmagazine.com. You make yourself an amazing day and enjoy this conversation with Monica. Monica, thank you. Thank you for creating this space to talk about talking to plants today. I'm both, I feel like I'm at home in this conversation because it's so close to my heart, both plants and talking to plants. And I'm so curious about just diving into how you discovered that plants have a voice. What voice do they have, and why it matters as to humanity, and then also why it matters to farmers and gardeners, and how we might be able to learn from the insights that the plants have to share with us. So please tell us how, first of all, what does talking to
I
plants?
mean, I have so many things to say in response to everything that you just brought up. And maybe can I just say how I discovered it?
Yes, yes, I'd love to know.
This is, I share this story quite often. So some people who are familiar with me have heard this story before, but it was so amazing and transformative for me. Let's see, probably about 20 something years ago. I was living in Seattle and I was working for a woman, and she introduced me to this idea of the consciousness of the earth. And she had me read all of these books about Findhorn, this garden in Scotland, where they were working with the land in a somewhat different way. And then there was all of this conversation about nature spirits and stuff like that. And I thought, oh, that's so cool, like fairy tales. But I was a little bit skeptical. It was like the thing that, from childhood, I'd always wished were possible or wished the world was that way, but had been taught that that's not how it is. And so I was reading these books and just kind of excited, but with a little bit of, like I said, skepticism. And then one day she sent me out into the garden and she said, okay, here's all of this ivy over here. Would you cut it back? And I thought, oh, wait, like, is it, it's conscious? Like, what's it like to be cut? I don't even know. And I was so concerned for the ivy. And then I just went out and I was like, okay, all of the consciousness here, all of the nature spirits, everything that I may have never acknowledged before. Hi, it's me. I have this job where I'm supposed to cut this ivy back. And can you just show me what I should cut and what I shouldn't cut? Because I know that sometimes pruning a plant can actually make it stronger or if you do it in a way that doesn't really work for the plant, it can make it weaker, so I knew that it wasn't going to be the end of the world, but I wanted some more insight or some more guidance on how to go about that. So I just made that request, please, like, show me what to do. And then I just started going. And then every once in a while, my hands would just stop. And each time they stopped, I knew, well, okay, I asked. So maybe this is that little whisper that I had been asking for. And so then I would, put down the shears and kind of dig around. And every time my hand stopped, I was about to cut through like a little, volunteer cedar tree that was growing under the ivy. Or even at one point, it was even like the drip hose, like the watering system. And so it was just so cool to me to have that sense of like, wow, I just asked and it wasn't even hard. And then I just started asking everything about everything. I would go into the garden and I would be like, what's this? And what are these bugs doing? And it opened up this sense of wonder and playfulness and this joy at discovering what it is to be with this glorious earth and to not have to come from this position of I know what to do, but more what what wisdom is there, the ways that the different plants are working with the soil and working with the insects and working with the rainfall and all of that. There's such a beauty to it all and such a dynamic brilliance to it all that goes so far beyond my comprehension. And I know that there are amazing, brilliant people who've written about all of this in different ways, but they've written from observation, not from creation. They weren't the ones to decide this is how it is. They were the ones to discover, oh, this is a dynamic that I'm seeing. And so I just was so excited to be able to like cut right through all of the reading and studying and experimenting and get right to the source and just say, okay, so what what should I do here? And like, plant, what would you like? Where should I cut? And just asking all of those different things. Then I started to notice this remarkable um, flourishing, this brilliant, just like responsiveness that everything has that far exceeds what I ever expected. And so then thinking about, so what's the value of this? Well, it's beautiful to recognize that we are part of a conscious living world that can thrive with us if we allow ourselves to step into the conversation that is already going on without having to be like I'm the one who's in charge, but what is possible here, and how can I contribute to this, and what can I receive, and is there something for me to change, something for me to discover that's outside of anything that I've been taught, you know? And so that just kind of opens this doorway for this interconnected growth where we get to be stewards of the earth as the earth is stewarding us.
And Monica, when you say that you heard or felt the plant saying, yes, cut here, and no, don't cut here, there's a cedar growing, or there's a like a watering hose there. What did that sound like or feel like?
That's such a great question. Well, for me, at first, a lot of it was really physical. So, like I said, I just started going, and then every once in a while, my hands would just stop. And it wasn't like I couldn't push through and, like they were coming up against some strong, like, obstacle that I couldn't cut through. It was just like a hesitation. And I was listening for that. I was just open to anything that seemed different. Now, I have um, really been listening to my body for a long time. I was a professional dancer at the time. So listening to my body was my primary focus. But for other people, it might be really different. And for me, it has changed over the years. The energetic communication that the world is giving us all the time is not in language. And it is, if you require that language, or if you require it be familiar in a way that you've been exploring with people, you might feel frustrated. But I like to think about, many of us have different pets. And though your pets don't speak to you in a particular language, English, French, etc., you can tell when they're upset. You can have a sense of what's going on for them. And they may be communicating with you quite effectively without words, you know? And so it's like one of the big things that I think is different for me than it is for other people is that I've noticed that sometimes people are looking for something very concrete that they can define. And then that definition will give them a sense of, okay, I can trust this. And then that makes it a fact, or that makes it real. And I'm willing to explore
Mm.
and just to go, oh, what was that? That, that was a little whisper, it was just like a little like, know about cutting here, or a hesitation, or a sense of like, yes, do that, this, just this excitement. And so in talking to plants and talking to the consciousness of the world, of the universe, without having to use words, it actually does require that you be willing to trust yourself and to not have to get it right. There may be times that you're like, oh, I should definitely cut this. And you do. And then you discover, oh, that really didn't work at all. And that may be a way that you kind of begin to tune or attune your awareness to the kind of uh, information that you're receiving. So
Mm.
it's like as you're willing to ask questions and open up your receptivity and say, okay, what what is this? What's possible here? Carden, what would you like? With a patience, I would say, and a spaciousness to it, where you're not like, what would you like? Tell me right now. Why aren't you telling me? If you don't tell me in a way I can understand, then this isn't real, or all of that other stuff that we can go into. But just like, Garden, what would you like? That's beginning a conversation. And then the way that you receive the information, it may show up in all sorts of kind of mysterious ways. There have been times that I have asked a question about, this plant seems to be having something going on that I'm not really familiar with. What is this? And so I'll sit down and be like, hey, plant, what's going on? And then I just relax and I just ask for whatever information I require to come. And then it may be a couple days later, I'm walking down the street and I overhear somebody being like, my plumeria is really, blah, blah, blah. And then the information is coming from somewhere else. So it really is an adventure, the adventure of receiving information. And if you can relax and allow that to be a sense of like play, then it takes the pressure off of you for having to get it right and get the right answer, and the pressure off of the plants for having to tell you in a way that you get right away within 30 seconds, or else you're wrong or bad, But so for each person, it's really quite different. And the more you ask and the more you engage, the more you start to kind of understand. Just like if you were to go to a foreign country and try to learn a new language, past your childhood, at first it all sounds like just unintelligible gibberish. And then after a while, you begin to kind of pick different things out. And then you start to kind of tune yourself to the rhythms of that language, to the words, to the energies of that language. And it's really similar with the plants too, where I would say that the primary things are to be willing to let it not have to be human when
Mhm.
you're engaging with a plant, to not have to personify it and be like, well, this plant is sad or this plant is angry or whatever, but to let it speak plant language, which is we're surrounded by it. Our bodies are alive on this planet because of the plants, but it may not be a language that we've been engaging with.
Mhm. Yeah, I love how you said, and you just gave everybody permission to make mistakes, to make those or missteps, or to make those um, movements that might not have been right, but they were right because they're taken. When you said, like even if you make that cut, and it's the cut that maybe wasn't best for optimal growth or resourcefulness or whatever it was for that plant is still speaking to us, right? It's still telling us what to do next and what we might do differently.
Yeah, and the it's so interesting with the commodification of plants, where plants become our livelihood or become money for us, then that puts a different pressure on things. And people can get real upset if their plants die. But I do like to invite people to kill a plant. I mean, obviously I love plants, but to to let yourself off the hook, to realize that it's not the end of the world, and that it doesn't mean that you are a bad person. Because all quite often I see people who have come to some sort of conclusion about like, I'm bad with plants. No plants live around me, or, whatever it is that I have a black thumb or stuff like that, because maybe one plant died, or and then they never wanted to try again, rather than I love to water plants, and sometimes I can overwater, you know? And like for me, when I was first starting to have plants of my own, I that was like the perfect example, the one I just gave. I did love to water plants. Like every time I thought about plants, I would want to water them. So I just got one plant that really needed a lot of watering, and I would just water and water and water that. And then I would leave all the other ones alone. But that was me having a sense of allowance for me and what I needed as a part of the interaction and the joy that I got to receive, because it is a togetherness that we're talking about. Talking to the plants is actually talking with the plants, and your voice gets to be a part of the conversation, and the plant's voice gets to be a part of the conversation. And you don't have to try and get it all right and make sure that there's only the perfect yields, and it's just bounty that people would write books about. It's There is the living and dying and decaying and all of that that actually strengthens you and your awareness. And there are times that a plant will die, and that may create something greater for the future. If you put a plant in the ground for even one day, it changes like the song of the land. Each plant has a really different resonance. And, there's all of the cool, like chemical stuff that they're doing in the soil of like working with the nitrogen and stuff like that. But there's also the energy of that plant itself. And like if you move to a new place and you walk in and there are no plants, and then you begin to move different plants in, it'll start to have a really different quality to it. That I like to call the song of each plant, the voice of each plant, and it is being that resonance out into the universe. So if you put a plant in the ground for even one day, it has just added to the song of the earth. And that may have an impact far beyond what we can even comprehend, you know? And so if you put a plant in the ground and then it dies, you that doesn't mean that you failed, you know? You got to grow as you discovered. It might be like, oh, this isn't necessarily the perfect conditions for that type of plant. Good to know. I didn't realize that. Or, you know, whatever it is. Maybe you putting that plant there changed what was going on with the soil, and then future plants will be able to grow in a different way. So it's like, I just mentioned before when we commodify plants and we have a sense of like, this is my crop and I need it to be a certain way in order to be successful, that puts a lot of pressure on us. And I'm really curious about like what it is that's possible for us to grow into as a species, the human species on the planet, to actually be working with the land in a different way where we can begin to nurture the places where the land has been disrupted to the point of disharmony, where it needs to kind of heal itself, like where we've had these, mono cultures of one type of crop, and then the soil kind of gets depleted, and then all of the different things that kind of spiral off of that. But to move into a space where we can have a willingness to be and to contribute to what will create greater for the future. And that may be the future harvest 5 years from now, or just next week, or, but kind of as much as possible, being willing to have some of what you might call failure without that abuse that we can so easily heap upon ourselves.
Mhm. And how important do you feel it is for, I'll say humanity, for us to talk to plants?
Well, I just think it's fun. And I have done a lot of different kind of experiments on my own of just like asking different plants to bloom, or doing different energy work on different plants and asking for the energy to flow differently. And there was in the US there was a while that there was a lot of conversation about bullying. And so they were doing these experiments with plants where they would have two plants right next to each other. And one the kids would yell at and bully, and the other that had, very similar light and water conditions, the people would be like, "You're great. I love you so much." And the ones that they bullied would just die. And then the ones that they were nurturing, even energetically, would flourish. And so for me, my huge secret agenda is just to get to see the plants blossom, to see this glorious planet just decked out in vibrant healthy, nurtured plants. And if people talking to them can contribute to that, I'm like, that's the most important thing in the universe. But also I find that it's empowering to know that like your energy, the impact that your energy has on the world. And we can see that very easily with plants because they respond very readily and dynamically to the energy that we bring to them. And so talking to the plants is not just about talking to the plants. It's about a way of being in the world that is acknowledging that everything around us is alive and growing in the ways that it is. And to have that kind of honoring of the plants, the animals, extends out into the way that you're walking through the world. And so talking to the plants and actually being willing to have a sense of what they are saying, that requires something that I don't necessarily have the words for, but it requires something within us to open and bloom. And that, I think, especially with everything that's going on these days, with all of the political strife and fighting and dislike of one another, that is seems so predominant and is so depressing to so many and so upsetting that for us to begin to shift that is something that I'm asking for. And just to go out and say hello to a plant and relax and open up within yourself, whatever it is that you need to open up to actually hear what's going on around you. I see that as extending and being this like huge political, activism for creating a space for kindness, for caring and nurturing to really extend across this planet.
Absolutely. And so it is.
Yeah.
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 Monica, what do you think people get wrong when they're trying to talk to plants?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, A, that they don't try to. That they don't even start or that they assume that they can't. Those are huge blocks. And and then it's I've touched on it already, but there is that sense of needing it to show up in a certain way that is familiar rather than allowing it to be whatever it might be for you. And then just continuing to ask again and again and again. So that impatience, that need for an immediate result, that needs to be something that is clearly identifiable, that I see as being huge, just roadblocks on that path.
And what do you see people getting really right when they are first successful with talking to plants?
It's funny. I'm gonna be talking to another friend today about what it is that she learned from me about talking to plants. And there are so many of us who maybe don't use language the way that everybody else does, or maybe some of us who have thought we weren't very smart or didn't fit in these different ways. And it's like there's so many different ways to be. And it's really amazing. This particular friend of mine, when I first began to spend time in her home, she had very few plants. And then we would just hang out with plants and I would talk to her about all of this stuff. And something just began to shift in her. And now it's like her house is just a jungle. And it's not even necessarily that she was doing any of this, like, what do you need, plant? It was just like a receptivity in her that opened, that allowed her energy of caring to be directed toward her plants. And she didn't have to, have meetings with her plants or, journal about anything. She just allowed herself to enjoy them and to let go of her sense that she didn't know how. And that was it. And it's funny because I would say that that's something that is very right, that you don't have to have a defined structure to how it is that you're being with plants. That you being however you are is going to be a completely different energy than me being how it is that I am. And that each of us are our own types of nutrients to the world, that each of us really freely being who we are without having to hold back and try and do it right and structure it and figure it out and make sure that we don't, accidentally just like relax and be us, but that each of us just being what it is that we are is nurturing to the universe and is nurturing to the plants, and allowing yourself to relax and let go of the frantic stress of uh, everything that we've been taught we're supposed to fit within. Letting go of that allows plants to grow. you know
Oh, that's really powerful. So what I'm hearing is one of the most powerful things we can do to connect with plants, to talk to plants, to hear plants speak to us is to be ourselves fully.
Yeah. And they invite you to that, in like when I go to talk to a plant. So, like, let's say there's this plant here,
Mhm.
which is actually a really great example, I would say, because I got this plant and when I got it, this woman was putting some neem oil on it. And that's supposed to be good for dealing with bugs, and she also just liked that it made it shiny. And then ever since I got it, it's had this weird residue on it, and it's been a little bit like kind of and every time I would hang out with it, I would look at it, and honestly, the first things that would come up were me just looking at it and seeing it not be as vibrant as I knew it could be. Immediately, I would have this sense of, oh no, what am I doing wrong? And what I know is that, like, with everything that I've said before now, that's not actually my point of view. I really do have this sense of we are walking down this path together. And for this moment, I am doing everything that I can to contribute to this plant. And I am receiving the nurturing of this plant. So it's not about what am I doing right or wrong. So when I have this sense of that energy of like, oh no, I'm doing this wrong, I know that that is an energy that's up, an energy that is here. And honestly, I do have a sense that the woman that I bought the plant from had that energy in her world, that she was a little bit stressed out, so she was trying to do the right thing. And so it's taken a while for me just to like be with it and relax and notice that energy coming up and not immediately burden myself with that energy and be like, oh no, I'm the one who's wrong, but just to kind of say, okay, so plant, like anywhere that that energy has been projected at you, kind of just that, just like ask it to release or just ask it to dissipate. you know? Um, and then and then I forget about it and I go on about my day. And then maybe in a few days, I go and I sit next to that plant again. And then I notice, oh, that energy isn't as loud, or it is, whatever it is. And then I just get to ask some more questions. And then asking those questions, I have to be present with myself to allow the conversation to really go anywhere. Because if I start to just judge myself and go, oh, I'm doing this wrong, that energy that I noticed, then I stop the exploration. I stop engaging, you know, rather than like, okay, now what? Or, what else can I try? The adventure gets halted by the judgment. And I, as a being, get all twisted up in response to the judgment. So instead of that twisting, the allowing myself to just kind of relax and be like, okay, I'm not wrong. You're not wrong. What else is possible here? That is a way that I get to kind of open up to being me more and more and more without all of that, you know, trying to fit into the structures of the right and wrong of things.
Mhm.
And that allows me to be present with the plant rather than trying to maintain my image.
Mm. So presence is one of the most important aspects of talking to plants.
Yeah, yeah. And it's one of my favorite aspects too of, getting to be alive and to notice whatever it is that I notice in the moment and then be like, oh, it just changed. Oh, and that changed and that changed,
Tell
So
me
that,
tell me more about that when you're in that moment and you're present with those plants or a plant and you're like, "Oh, that changed and that changed. Oh, and look at that." What are those things that you're noticing?
so there was a plant that I had when I was living in New Orleans. Somebody had planted a big tree in my backyard. And then, the winter came and everything died back. And then the spring into the fall of the next year. And that one tree was not growing. And everything else was. And it was like, that tree might be dead. And so I'm also an acupuncturist, and I had somebody who was kind of like an apprentice in the clinic, and I was wanting to teach this one energetic technique. And I went out and I was like, let's go work on this tree. And so we were doing a bone bending technique, which is like if you go to bend a twig that's completely dry, you can just snap it. But if it has life in it, you can kind of bend it a little bit. And so that's one way to practice this, which is very useful technique for somebody that's had a broken bone that's healed but not healed very properly. Anyway, so we went out to do this bone bending technique. And there was just a moment where I was like, is there any life still in this tree? And so then I kind of just asked to like put my attention into the soil and I just like reached down energetically and was like, is there any life here? And it was like a little flicker of just like, and so then I just asked for that energy to flow up through the roots and through the plant. And so this other woman and I had our hands on the plants, and I was like, let's just ask for the energy to flow up through the plant. And then there was just a moment where holding on, it just something felt different. It was not anything that I even can begin to put into words, like the quality. It was just, oh, it's different. And so we just let go. and that's it. And then the next day and the next week, it started to put out shoots and it totally came back to life, which was so exciting to have that and to be able to do that with someone else too and be like, wait, did you just notice something? Yes, I did. Great. And we didn't have to understand it. We didn't have to define it. We didn't have to, and it wasn't even, I didn't have any sort of expectation that that tree would come back to life. Um, but it was just, oh, there's something. And then it just seemed like, okay, that's enough. So we could have stayed out there all night, like trying to do all sorts of stuff, which is more effort than is required. The earth is really responsive. I have another kind of fun story about insects that that I would love to share. I planted a bunch of nasturtium in 3 different pots, and one day I went out and they were all covered in aphids. And I had been reading different stories about what people had done at Findhorn in this garden in Scotland with different insects. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll try this thing. So I went and I sat out there and I was like, okay, let's have a meeting. And, to anybody else, it would just look like I was sitting out there. But I was just like, hello, nasturtium. Hello, aphids. It's me, Monica. Let's talk. And all of a sudden, I had this sense of an energy that was very different than anything that I had ever engaged with before. And it's like, for me, because I'm kind of engaging with plants all the time, in a way, it doesn't even seem like anything. It's like really quiet. It's just like a part of my world to the point where I almost take it for granted. But then when I noticed this other energy, it was like, whoa, oh, I think that's the insects. Wow. Okay, cool. And then I just said, I'm not sure what it is that you guys are doing. I know that you're doing something because I see you together all the time, nasturtium and aphids. And so, whatever that is in the universe, who knows what the balance is, or what the nasturtium's requiring, or what the aphids are requiring for the future bugs, for the birds, like who knows what it is that each thing is being in the world. But if you guys wouldn't mind, would you just move over to this one plant so that you can do your thing there and then I can enjoy these other nasturtium? And then the next day, and that was it. That was it. That's all I said. And then the next day, 100% of the aphids had moved to the one plant. I didn't even know that aphids could move that quickly. They had all moved over, and it was just me asking them. Now, I definitely, had to get past feeling crazy. Am I really out here talking to bugs? Am I really going to have a meeting with a plant and some insects? But I did, and it was so amazing. And I've discovered that that is the case more often than I would have ever expected, that there's an immediate responsiveness that is available. And now I love to talk about bugs because I feel like they're such amazing gardeners and they're such a contribution to life on this planet that is not really often acknowledged. And in fact, people are like in the midst of war with different types of insects all over the planet. But it's not always just like, hey, would you move over there? Because sometimes what that insect is being is actually needs to be received in a different way. So that's one thing, but that is kind of to talk about that presence that's required, and the way that things shift and change in the moment in ways that you never would expect, I wouldn't have expected. I don't know what I was expecting when I sat down to talk to the bugs and the plants. I definitely didn't expect that energy to show up, but I noticed when it did. I didn't have to understand it, and I didn't make myself wrong or doubt myself, because the doubting yourself is just another way to stop yourself.
Mm, that's so true, Monica. And that's true for anything, right? Doubting yourself is just one way to stop yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially, when you start to try and talk to the plants, which doesn't have a a very, I don't know, popular roadmap, or it's something that each of us may do incredibly differently. And so if you're doubting yourself every step of the way, how much are you really going to stick with it? You know? But if instead you could really let it be an exploration where you get to go for those little hunches that you have. Investigate and see, okay, well, what about if I try this? And then allow your awareness to grow from that.
Mhm. Yeah, so true. I've done that a lot when in our gardens too, and in our fields. When, in particular, what comes to mind is the dahlias, and um, every season there. Sometimes there's hardly any bugs, but almost every season there's often one or two plants that are heavier with the bugs. And I literally, when I'm picking other dahlias and I see um, more bugs on them, I'll ask them to go and I'll be like, hey, there's some other plants over there. Would you mind moving over to there? I do that too. And it's amazing how it totally works.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it really does. And then I also will say, like if you need another plant, then I totally understand that too. So it's yeah, it's so fascinating, so powerful. You touched on this a little bit, which was the state of our world and the divisiveness politically, and not just politically, but just um, the divisiveness in conversations in humanity and in the ethos right now. And I'm so curious, what do plants want us to know?
I love this. I ask plants about this all the time, actually. And if you look at a tree that is hosting so many different other life forms, fungi and bacteria and insects and bugs and other plants, and there's no separation. It's not like, no, I'm not going to receive from the sun today, or that there's an inclusiveness that is the plant kingdom. It's how and definitely different plants will shift and change and adapt to grow in different ways, to have more success in different ways, to flourish in different ways, but it's not through a fight or a separation. It's through a being with everything that is an energy that I think is so foreign to humanity at this point, to the systems and the cultures and the structures that we have cultivated and created as a species over thousands of years. And there is, how many more thousands of years can we be living, you know? And where would we like to shift and grow? How can we guide our future to a space where there is more living available? Where there's so much kind of doomsday energy about, oh no, oh no, oh no, everything's horrible, we messed up, or we inherited a planet that is just in decline. And it's like, well, what if it's not? And what if we can actually create with it to create for the future, for 10,000 years from now? What could this planet be like? And for me, when I'm asking these questions and dreaming these dreams, this this wisdom of being with everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, without a point of view about it, is there's a strength to that that is something that is unfamiliar to me as a person, but so like represented by the plant kingdom. And so that's one thing that I often tap into of, so what is that? What is that generosity without reserve? What is that nurturing and gifting? What is that that I see in all of the plants around me? What would it be like to be that without having to just, be pummeled by the people who won't receive it, who will just like chop me down? It's like what is possible here? So with plants, one huge thing that I see is that the concept of separation doesn't actually exist in the plant kingdom. And and that I'm curious what it would be like if we were to let go of that. Like if you were to actually know that the welfare of your neighbor is your welfare, you know, that the trees that are over there are providing for your body, that the water that is over there is providing for the fish that are providing, that there's this interconnectedness that we can begin to open up to include in our awareness and begin to make choices from that space rather than this sense of like mine, you know. So it's a huge conversation, but it's also something that is literally living and growing all around us. This example of working with to create an ecosystem that allows for life to flourish. And we can do that. We can do that.
Yes, yes, yes. I'd love to have a part two with you and go deeper into this. Is that
Yeah,
okay?
let's do it.
Um, I what I also like to touch on today is seeds. We've talked a lot about talking with plants, and what about talking with seeds? What does that look like? And what influence do we have, if any, of seeds and how they grow in our communication with them and presence with them?
That is so great. I haven't asked that so far as much as maybe I could. What I love about seeds is that there's the sense of possibility within them, and that you can engage with the possible future that is, here is the tree. Here in my hand is, the whole crop or whatever. And that you can allow yourself to engage with the consciousness of that and the consciousness of the future possibilities, and then ask for all of the things that are required to nurture those future possibilities to show up, you know? And so I may have I may be coming from a different perspective than other people because um I don't own the house that I live in. And so I play with the entire planet as my garden. And so I don't have a huge sense of needing for things to show up in a certain way. So I like to kind of say to the seeds, like, hey, what's possible? Show me where you would like to go. And then I will put them anywhere. Even if it's, like, not on my land. Of course, I'm not if, there's, like, a super cultivated garden, I'm not, like, throwing dandelions over there, but I just have a different sense of, like, um, not having the time frame that certain people have, and a willingness to just, like, go kind of guerrilla with my seed spreading. So hope that's not illegal or anything. But yeah, just as with everything, asking for what's possible here, asking for the consciousness of that seed to show you where it might like to go or when, and then relaxing if you don't get it right, and then trusting your intuition. I had some seeds. I don't own this place, but I freely garden everywhere. So have a bunch of flowers and stuff like that. And there was all of these packets of seeds, the flower seeds that I had. And I kept on thinking, oh, I should put these out. But I asked, and then I lost a packet. And then I found it again, and it was great because, like, if I had planted that packet when I had originally thought to, it was actually the wrong time. Like, there was a freeze that came all of a sudden right after I would have put those seeds into the ground. So it's kind of like this this mix of magic between asking and the kind of what may seem like happy accidents, and then that kind of guidance to do this or to plant in this way that is available when we begin to engage with the consciousness that's there.
So powerful. It's like I'm just thinking about like being a farmer and looking at the crops and wondering, is it like are you ready to be harvested? And sometimes we get this intuition. It's like harvest this now, but we're like, yeah, it's not ready, or I don't have time, or we come up with all these different reasons. And then, big frost hit, or big rain, or big weather event hits. And it's like, oh my gosh, I was totally going to do it, but we don't do it, right? Or vice versa, we do it and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I did that when I felt like it was the right time, even though it didn't make sense, because it just all worked out. And I think that is that little nuance of talking to plants, even though this person might not say I talk to plants. That's
Well,
listening.
totally, totally, totally. And we can encourage each other
Yeah.
to talk to plants more and then share with each other our discoveries, me sharing that about the bugs, and then you saying that you have a similar experience, and then there's somebody here who gets to hear that for the first time, and then they ask the bugs to move to a new plant, and then it's like we all get to grow together too with this empowerment that is possible for us to engage with the consciousness of the earth and to be stewards of the land, to
Mhm.
work with rather than to be like dictators.
Mm, so true. And Monica, what's your personal biggest challenge in talking to the plants?
Hmm, that's such a great question. I mean, honestly, there are a lot of times that I'm like, do I even talk to the plants? Because I do so much that it's not like I don't sit down and do it, but plants will thrive around me. Um, and it's so funny that 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 thing that is so nurturing to me that I actually have capacities with, there are times that I'm like, am I making this up? You know, am I a fraud? Am I? did I even like, because my way of engaging with plants is so different. I'm like, but I don't have like the award-winning garden. It's like, yeah, because I'm not engaging with it that way. So it can be like so I don't know, a space of vulnerability to to continue to talk to the plants and to invite others to talk to the plants, even when there are times that I'm like, am I doing this? What is this? Being an adventurer that's like on an uncharted path, it can be confusing sometimes. Or, so I would say that that's just very truthfully the thing that comes up for me is like, why would anybody want to listen to me about this? But it is something that I'm just so inspired to invite others to, for them to have their own journey, to not have to try and do things like I do, especially on the days when I don't know if I'm doing anything right. When
Right.
I'm
Right. And when you have that niggly, which is like, am I really doing this? Am I really talking to plants? Am I a fraud? What language do you use, or what do you do to help shift and reconnect with that deeper truth of, yeah,
I
talking to
mean, honestly, the one thing that I find is like the greatest fertilizer is my enjoyment of the plants. I love plants so much. They are so beautiful. I can sit next to a plant for quite a long time and just like look at the colors and just hanging out with it. It's like whether somebody would call that talking to it or not, it it brings a vitality to my life and to my living that nurtures me so completely. And when I allow for that, all of that kind of paranoia and nervousness just gets washed away. And so it is that space. And this is something that when I was talking about that plants don't have that separation, this is something that I am so inspired by is that when you receive, that is a gift. And when you truly gifting, there's receiving, that there's this simultaneity of it there. It's like if you want to hug somebody who doesn't want to be hugged, how that's kind of yuck. But if you really desire to hug somebody and they really desire to be hugged, then in one hug you have two hugs, and it goes in all directions. And so with the plants, when I allow myself just to adore them, I notice that they will flourish and then I flourish. And there's that enlivening that washes away the doubts. And that's a remedy that I use often. It's just to adore my plants. And that is I almost feel like there's a whole language of the enjoyment of plants that I strive to be more and more articulate in.
That's really, it just made me pause because what hit me when you said that is just the power of adoration, whether that be with plants, a friend, a family member, your significant other. It's transformational. Yeah, adoration, transformational. And what are some questions people can ask and sit with plants to just learn to listen?
Such a great question. I mean, first of all, I I get just saying hello. Just going out and saying hello to a bunch of plants and just notice what comes up for you when you say hello. Do you feel like you're being crazy or whatever? You don't have to use your mouth. You don't have to say it out loud, but you can. But just to energetically turn toward the plant and acknowledge it and that it has even the possibility to talk to you. Just saying hello is the beginning of that conversation. And then if you go out and you say hello, 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 and you are feeling crazy, then, your job is going to be to get over yourself, you know, to like let go of that insecurity or that, whatever that is. Like, am I crazy? Who cares? Just enjoy it and explore. And so, hello, hello, hello. And then you can start to ask, there are a few different things. So, like, if you're looking to have more plants in your home, you can go to a plant store and just ask which plants would like to come home with me. And I've had to change that because I used to get like, and then I would say, okay, knowing the housing conditions that I have, which plants would like to come home with me? And then it was quite different, so I'd have to kind of give the plants a sense of like what my home was like. I would just flash an image of that. I would just have the sense of that and then ask which plants would like to come home with me. And then I would try with those plants, so I'd get those plants and then just be like, hey, how are you doing? And then I would ask the plants, can you tell me when you need water? and some other kind of practical things, and then don't water them until you get the sense that they need water, and then starting with some of the kind of basic things, but then it's like, what are you curious about? I'm constantly asking plants about photosynthesis just because I think it's so cool. I'm like, what is that? And then I'll have an energetic sense of it. Is it something that I have any words for, or even any idea of like how to use that information? No, but I ask all the time, because I'm fascinated by it. So it's like you can ask practical questions about like which plants can work in your space and how to take care of them, and then just kind of starting a dialogue of, please let me know what you require. But it doesn't just have to be about that kind of caretaker role. Often I have asked, and I do different classes on this, and I've asked, the plants, like, what would you like to tell the students in this class? And often it's, please receive. The plants are, asking for us to receive more from them, that they would like to gift more to us energetically. And sometimes we can receive just by turning our attention there and just, having a sense of this glorious tree or this glorious meadow or whatever, So plants are not only needing to talk to you about like water this, don't water that. They can talk to you about so many other things. So the questions that you ask are really up to you. And I would invite people to just start with hello.
I love that. Start with hello. Feels like a beautiful place to wrap with you, Monica, and leave people wanting more. And yes, um, I is there anything else that we haven't touched on today about talking to plants that's on your heart that you'd like to shine a light on?
I mean, it's I've said this multiple times at this point, but it's an adventure, and that you getting to be on the adventure of living, creating with the entire planet. Like, what a cool adventure, you know? And that, from that space of exploration, that's what I'm excited about, seeing who shows up to explore and what each person can contribute to all of us in discovering what else is possible with plants, and what more and more people talking to the plants can create in terms of the vibrancy of the planet, but this is this adventure that we all get to be a part of. And what an honor it is to get to invite people to that.
That's beautiful. And can I go one more place before we wrap?
Yeah.
A few more minutes? Yeah. And what's your understanding of different practices that are from around the world that talk to plants and that have relationships with plants? Like I guess you could say like biodynamics um, and different practices. So I'm just curious what your understanding of them is and how similar or different you'd say um, it is than what you say talking to plants is.
Well, I'm constantly looking to how others are going about things in a way that can inspire me, And as I mentioned, some of the things that first introduced me to even go out and ask a question in the garden were practices that other people were doing. And I get that there's a lot of amazing people that are exploring in really different ways, and acknowledging the wisdom of plants in many different ways, from the like shamanic to, I don't have all of the words for it, but all of this grand spectrum of how people are engaging with plants is inspiring. And what I have noticed from my own different work in different types of fields, I studied a lot of Chinese medicine, and the way that plants were used with the herbal medicine. One thing that I think is interesting is to acknowledge the qualities that different plants have and how they move and the energy that they be and what that can create medicinally, for example. And I find that when we try to codify things, that sometimes we oversimplify to the point of confusion or to the point of becoming inaccurate. That you may have two plants that are the exact same plant, the same type of fern, maybe that even originally came from the same plant. And they actually may have different needs, and they each may have a different voice. So if you start to try to apply all of the same principles without engaging with the consciousness of that plant, then I see that as being a little bit of a trap, where we try to simplify to be like, oh, this plant means this, or this symbolizes this, or this has this quality. And it's like, well, maybe it did, but does that particular plant that you're talking about have that energy today? And so this is where it's like it's unruly in a way to have to be so present that we are inspired by each other, but not mm, forced to only fit within the structured lines that have been laid out before us. So there, I studied a lot of different shamanic things, and there were things that were like, you have to go about it this way. And what I loved so much was that you were invited to be aware of something that was outside of the everyday, that you were invited to explore something that maybe you hadn't encountered before. But then there were a whole bunch of rules, you know, and and those rules didn't necessarily include me and my awareness and my contribution to the conversation. And so that's one thing. When I look at what people are doing all around the planet, I choose to be inspired by what people are doing And then I take that inspiration and then I go into the garden and then I begin to ask the plants. And there may be days that what I'm hearing other people are doing, it's exactly what I'm the plants are saying to me that day. And there may be times that it's not that, and that doesn't have to invalidate anything that anybody else has said, but it's more about if I don't have to just repeat what somebody else is doing, but get to actually add to the conversation, then I can receive what everybody's doing and then grow all of that information by including my voice too, and my awareness that I grow through asking questions. I hope that got to some of what you were asking about, but yeah.
Yeah, 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 it really did. Yeah. It too feels like a whole different conversation on its own. So, um, yeah, yeah. Monica,
I could talk on and on and on and on, and I do.
yes, 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 me too. Yeah, we're sisters in that way. Um, so honoring your time, I thank you deeply for the work that you're doing, for the way that you're just able to so beautifully and eloquently invite us to be curious about talking to plants, and to just be in wonder and to deepen into how we're not separate from, but part of nature, part of
Absolutely.
the collective. And I think that uh, I hope that lands with people listening and people watching. So I thank you for bringing that and amplifying it and just shining a beautiful, pure pureness and radiance on our interconnectedness with nature.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Wait
Monica.
for our next conversations.
Yeah. Where is the best place for people to find you?
Talk to the plants. You can go to talktotheplants.com. You can look Talk to the Plants on Instagram. There's a Talk to the Plants on Facebook. It's very easy. Talk to the
And
plants.
YouTube too, right?
YouTube,
A little
I'm
bit.
just getting my YouTube together more. I'm spending more time talking to the plants than putting this together. But Talk to the Plants, yeah, talktotheplants.com has all sorts of ways to get in touch with me, classes that I have coming up, classes that I've done in the past
Awesome.
to explore.
Awesome. So if you want to learn more about talking to the plants and if you want to deepen into that and have some time with Monica, then head on over to Talk to the Plants. Go check her out. Follow her on Instagram and Facebook. Big love. Thanks, Monica.
So great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you. And it was just such an honor to spend some time with you. And now it's your turn to go and talk to your plants. Listen with your heart wide open and see what they have to say to you. What are they asking of you? How do you feel when you're around them? And what are their whispers? Thank you for joining us. If you have not signed up for a free newsletter yet at Heart and Soil, head on over to heartandsoilmagazine.com where you can sign up for free and be part of our community. We'd love to see you there and have you there and support you on your growing journey. Make yourself an amazing day. Big love.